Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across the continent and plenty more. First though, let's start with the run through the markets here for you. With a focus on East Africa, the communications regulator in Kenya released its quarterly data about 24 hours ago. Safaricom, obviously still the biggest player in the room, 64.2% market share, but that has reduced a bit by 7.7 percentage points. Closest rival, Airtel, it posted gains in the voice and the mobile data market. But this is the first time that the value of mobile money transactions is over $19.5 billion. And about 80% of that went through one company, Safaricom. That said, the firm shares are 14.5% lower on a year-to-date basis. Here's what's coming up next. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari presents a $28 billion budget. Intermittent food and fuel shortages in Sudan as the country battles a severe cash crisis. And Nigeria's Honeywell Group graduates its first cohort of business startups. Let's start tonight in Nigeria, home to Africa's biggest economy, where President Muhammadu Buhari has presented a $28.8 billion budget for 2019 to legislators. Now, the spending plan for Africa's top oil producer makes a series of key assumptions. Crude output at 2.3 million barrels of crude a day, an oil price average of $60 a barrel, and a dollar-naira exchange rate of 305. Mr. Buhari's handling of the economy, which emerged from its first recession in a quarter of a century this year, but remains very, very sluggish, is now a significant campaign issue. All right then, so let's dig a little deeper into exactly what this budget is doing. Deji Badnos joins us now live from Lagos with a lot more data. So Deji, let's start with the timing of this, presenting national budgets at the 11th hour. Now that seems to be the pattern at the moment. The 2018 budget was also similarly delayed. Why is this happening?
Well, in fact, Rama, you could say this is even coming rather early if you ask me, because don't forget the 2018 budget wasn't signed into law until June this year. So the president presenting this, some people will tell you it's early. It's quite a surprise that we've still not been able to get it right when it comes to the budget, as in getting the budget passed. A lot of people would have told you it would have made much sense, for instance, if that budget had been presented, say, sometime around October or latest November. But, well, at least it's been done this year. And I think part of the problem is because, you know, first is the budgets don't get prepared early, and then when they don't get passed early, I don't know, it basically makes those responsible now for preparing the budget to sort of relax, if you like, because they want to get a clearer picture of the performance of the previous budget. For instance, the budget of 2018, we still don't have a clear idea of how well it has performed. We wouldn't know until maybe early next year. So it's a problem, and it's one that the government is trying to address, and that's the reason why the president has decided to do this before the end of the year. So the hope is that the lawmakers too would be able to work on the budget and pass it probably before the elections, but I doubt if that's going to happen anyway.
Indeed, that is probably quite the long shot right there. But let's focus on the 2018 budget for a moment. It had a bunch of really overly optimistic assumptions. It assumed all output to be about 2.3 million barrels of crude a day. Actual output was like 500,000 barrels a day lower. Why are the exact same blunders being made in the 2019 budget? Because the basic assumptions really haven't changed except for the oil price.
Well, to be candid, Rama, I wouldn't call them blunders. I would just say these are estimates, and they're basically estimates and targets that the government has set for itself, and it has always been that way. You never can have exact estimates when it comes to the budget. In terms of you know, oil output, of course, overly optimistic. Last year, as you have said, we budgeted somewhere around 2.3 million barrels, and the president made it clear today that at some point we came up to 1.95 million barrels per day. So it's just estimate, and we just have to wait and see. I mean, everyone knows that we may not be able to pump that amount of, we may not be able to pump out that amount of oil when you also consider the OPEC quota that's in place. But then they are just estimates, they are targets, and good to have, you know, ambitious targets, but not overly ambitious like what we have now.
Indeed. So walk us through the highlights of this spending plan. The 2018 budget was about 9.12 trillion naira, roughly $25 billion, depending on the exchange rate you want to use. 77% of that is going to be funded through ordinary revenue. The 2019 spending plan about 3% smaller in naira terms. But how will it be funded?
Well, the bulk of the money will be coming from oil, and that's what the government has provided in the budget. As a matter of fact, what we have for oil is 3.73 trillion naira. That's somewhere in the region of, I think, some billions of dollars if you do the mathematics, depending on the exchange rate now you want to use. So the bulk of it coming from the oil, from oil, and the order, maybe a quarter of it will be coming from non-oil revenue, and then you have the company income tax and value-added tax and all of that. The government has also provided for recoveries. I'm talking about the recoveries now that it is making, so it expects that some money will come in from there. I talked about value-added tax, custom duties, and all of that. Well, that's where the money would be coming from. But of course, as you know, it is still a deficit budget, a deficit of about 4-point-something trillion naira. So it definitely means some, of course, will be coming from borrowing.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. That's Deji Badmus there live in Lagos. We'll keep a very close eye on the 2019 budget program in that country. Now, we're still in Nigeria. The unemployment rate over there, 23.1% in the third quarter of 2019. That's up from 18.1% a year earlier. The economy, or more accurately, the dismal performance of Africa's biggest economy, has been a major talking point in the run-up to the elections that Deji mentioned in February next year. President Muhammadu Buhari, as you might recall, came to power back in 2015 with a pledge to fix the economy. But his term has been marred by the country's first recession in 25 years and a very sluggish recovery since 2017. Atiku Abubakar, the main opposition candidate in this coming election, he's vowed to get Africa's largest economy back on track and to secure jobs for the workforce in a country of roughly 190 million people. Business leaders, as well as heads of state and government from the EU and African countries, have struck investment agreements worth over $1 billion at an EU-Africa forum hosted by Austria and Rwanda in Vienna. Migration was not on the agenda, officially, not at least, but it was often discussed on the sidelines of the event. Austria, of course, is trying to revive the EU campaign for North African states to take in more migrants who are embarking on a perilous journey across the Mediterranean. Since Europe's migration crisis, the EU has been trying to find ways to work with African countries to discourage or prevent migrants from embarking on the often deadly crossing. This year alone, IOM data indicates that over 2,200 people are either dead or missing in the Mediterranean.
The new relationship taking shape between our continents is focused on shared prosperity. Creating more jobs and trade in Africa will support employment and growth in Europe as well. Fully integrating the people of Africa into the global economy presents one of the greatest business opportunities of our time. By recognizing our fundamental interdependence, we will also be able to find humane, orderly, and mutually beneficial solutions to the migration challenges that dominate the headlines today.
Today, concrete agreements were signed that will enable investments in the African continent to the tune of more than €1 billion. I think that all these results show how diverse is the potential for all that binds Africa and Europe. And this was just the beginning, and we will work towards expanding on all these possibilities to bring about stability and fairness on both sides.
All right, then let's move on to Johnson & Johnson. It's scrambling at the moment to contain the fallout from an investigative report carried out by Reuters, which indicated that the healthcare conglomerate knew for decades that the cancer-causing chemical asbestos was present in its baby powder. The company took out full-page newspaper ads defending its product and its practices, and it's actually been preparing its CEO for his first TV interview since investors wiped out tens of billions of dollars from the company's market value. J&J shares were down nearly 3% on Monday. They closed at about $129.14 in New York. That drop was on top of a 10% plunge that wiped out about $40 billion off the company's market cap following that report. Its shares are down 6.4% so far for the year.
I want you to hear directly from me. We know that our talc is safe. In fact, for over 100 years, Johnson & Johnson has known that the talc in our baby powder is the purest, safest pharmaceutical-grade talc on Earth. Very importantly, if we believed our products were unsafe, they would be off the shelves and out of the market immediately. But thousands of tests by global authorities, universities, and independent experts repeatedly confirm our talc is safe. J&J has cooperated fully with the U.S. FDA and other global regulators, providing them with all the information they requested over decades. We've also made all our cosmetic talc mines and processed talc available to regulators for testing. Regulators have tested both, and they have always found our talc to be asbestos-free.
Right, then corporate headlines being our focus now. Let's start in the mining sector. AngloGold Ashanti is considering listing its shares in either London or Toronto in a move that could see the company hive off its remaining South African operations. Now, no final decision has been made, but the world's third largest gold producer has been discussing the plan internally and with external advisors. AngloGold is currently listed in Joburg. It has depository receipts, though, that do trade in New York as well. That listing is unlikely to happen, though, before 2020. Glencore-controlled Katanga Mining says it's agreed to pay more than $22 million to settle Canadian allegations of inadequate historical disclosures of its finances and activities in mines that it owns and runs in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Johnny Blizzard, CEO of the Toronto-listed company, will also resign and leave its board. That includes 3 new directors. Katanga shares closed up 5.3% at 60 Canadian cents. Compare that to the local stock benchmark of 0.4% gain. Katanga stock is down 68% so far this year. Africa-focused private equity firm Emerging Capital Partners says it has acquired a majority stake in a Kenyan restaurant chain, Art Cafe Group. Now, the move is a sign of growing international PE investor interest in East Africa. The move comes after ACP's stake sale last year in the Kenyan casual dining and coffee chain Java, which also has operations in Uganda and Rwanda. And finally, SoftBank shares slumped by more than 10% on their debut on Wednesday as investor appetite for Japan's biggest ever initial public offering was hurt by recent service outages at the telecoms operator. There are also worries over its exposure to Chinese telecoms gear maker Huawei. The poor start for the unit of the investment giant SoftBank Group was uncommon in the Japanese IPO market. Of the 82 IPOs so far this year, SoftBank was only the 7th to open below its offer price. That's a run through your headlines. We're about 15 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how competition for farming and grazing land is fueling conflict in central Nigeria. And intermittent food and fuel shortages in Sudan as the country battles a severe cash crunch. All that and more is coming up next.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. On to West Africa now. Competition for land resources does appear to be the primary cause of clashes in Nigeria's central belt. The expansion of farming land has essentially meant that the land available for grazing has reduced significantly, and that in turn is fueling a long-running conflict. CGTN's Beryl Oro filed this report.
Analysis of land use data in the country shows that expansion of farming in Nigeria's middle belt has cut off access to grazing lands, fueling constant violence in the region. And should the coming dry seasons follow the pattern of previous years, there are fears of an outbreak of violence. Clashes in the region have often been blamed on religious and ethnic division. But close examination has shown just how much it comes down to a simple clash over resources. This year only, the clashes between herding and farming communities have reportedly killed more people than the militant group Boko Haram.
We was just in cooking before we could know it. We had some gunshots from nowhere. So the gunshot was much for us. We will have to ask, the men have to ask women and children that they should come out, maybe to see from there. I just don't know what happened. We just run away. But we saw some of them on the way.
Open grazing lands in the Middle Belt have shown a decline of about 38% between 1975 and 2013, with farming areas also deteriorating sharply.
There is no single kilometer you go through without seeing farmland all over the place. Unlike what used to happen in those days in the 50s when the population was less. But today, roads, schools, and several other human activities have taken over settlements, the land.
We can do more, we can do differently. It always is a challenge to bring exactly the support that people need at that very moment. Now they're telling us they want to go back, we need to resettle, we need to restart life. It's another kind of support that when you arrive newly in an IDP camp. So we try to adapt the best we can to the needs of the people at the given moment in their displacement.
The shift towards farming not only reflects Nigeria's rapid growth, but also the country's efforts to diversify the economy. The central states make up about 1/3 of Nigeria's land area, with the Middle Belt accounting for almost 2/3 of the nationwide switch. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Headline inflation is now over 60%, and a lot of citizens in Sudan say that living conditions there are simply unbearable as the country is experiencing intermittent shortages of fuel, food and other supplies. Sudan's economy has been starved of hard currency inflows ever since South Sudan seceded in 2011, taking with it the lion's share of the country's oil deposits. Oil used to be a major export for Sudan and a source of foreign currency earnings as well.
A small crowd forms at a bakery in Khartoum, Sudan's capital. Bread shortages have hit the country, with wheat traders blaming a foreign currency crisis for shortages of the staple. People are queuing for hours outside bakeries. Sudan's economy has been struggling since the south of the country seceded in 2011, taking with it 3/4 of its oil output.
The economy used to be good and the purchasing power people had was reasonable, but conditions are now bad, the goods are expensive, and so people are unable to buy them.
The crisis has deepened over the years as a black market for US dollars has effectively replaced the formal banking system. This is after the Sudanese pound was devalued, making it more difficult to import essential supplies such as wheat. Inflation jumped to more than 50% in January when subsidy cuts triggered food price increases that kindled unrest. Since then, it has continued to accelerate despite attempts to slow price rises with strict limits on cash withdrawals. As of November, inflation stood at 68.93%, up from 68.44% in October.
The living conditions in Sudan are deteriorating. We have queues everywhere for fuel, and at the ATMs, you can't even pull your money out of the bank. You can't get your salary. Everything has become very expensive, and we don't know what is happening. It feels like there's a ticking bomb, and we don't know when it will explode.
Apart from oil and gold, Sudan also exports livestock, sesame and Arabic gum. Despite the numerous challenges, the country's cabinet says that it expects stronger economic growth, a big rise in exports, and a reduced budget deficit next year. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Let me take you back to 2015 when Ghana signed a $918 million three-year loan agreement with the IMF. Now, that extended credit facility was dispersed in 8 tranches. It required the state to make quite a few reforms. Freezing public sector employment was a key one, reducing the public deficit was another, and of course, the Bank of Ghana had to stop financing the budget deficit. As that deal comes to an end, though, the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, visited the country to take stock of progress made so far. CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo was there.
It seems to be a thumbs up for Ghana, with IMF head Christine Lagarde agreeing that its economy is in a better place than it was 2 years ago. Though the country was forced to delay the 2015 extended credit facility by some 6 months, she noted the government had made important gains towards macroeconomic stability.
The past 2 years, Ghana has implemented bold policies to reach another set of milestones. Inflation has come down to single digits. There's a primary fiscal surplus for the first time in more than a decade, and strong growth of about 7% is expected over the medium term, partly due to higher oil and gas production. Now, don't get me wrong, those are remarkable achievements. Yes. Now, every coin has 2 faces. Because at the same time, vulnerabilities have continued to build up, including in particular high levels of public debt, fiscal risks related to the energy sector, and vulnerabilities in the financial sector.
Other development finance institutions, such as the World Bank, agree with the IMF that Ghana's economy is on the right track. But much like the IMF, the World Bank says that its structural reforms are moving at a much slower pace than expected. For example, revenue collection in the first half of the year came in at just $4.6 billion, well below the $5 billion target. And of course, its debt burden isn't getting any better, moving from a 73% debt-to-GDP ratio in 2016 to just 67%.
And perhaps the biggest challenge is debt. That debt remains a challenge, and I think the government will need to continue looking out to manage better the debt profile and reduce the burden on the economy. So they're not yet distressed, but they're at high risk. And so better management of debt is something that Ghana is doing and needs to continue to do. We know that there have been programs to buy out domestic debt in particular, to change the debt profile.
Amongst the other concerns are the country's large non-performing loans and still relatively low levels of foreign exchange reserves. The IMF says there's still room to lift productivity and reduce income inequality by scaling up infrastructure investment. It can also further strengthen the finances of public energy companies through improved oversight and management, as well as improve the resilience of the financial system by addressing remaining weaknesses, especially in the non-bank sector. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Now, over in Egypt, the central bank will start printing plastic money instead of the paper notes that are currently in use over there. CGTN's Yasser Hakim filed the report.
Most of the Egyptian pounds notes are made from paper, but from 2020, these paper money will cease to exist in Egypt. It will be replaced by plastic notes.
It's a bit funny. Reminds me of the money in the Monopoly game we play. Real money is coins or paper, I guess.
It's a new idea, plastic. Yes, the paper notes get easily damaged, but how can I fold plastic money in my purse? I never saw plastic notes before.
There are only 44 countries currently using plastic notes, but experts say plastic is a better option than paper.
Number one, high quality, comparing with paper banknote. Number two, durable goods. The life for plastic money may be twice comparing with paper money. Number 3, to reduce the hygiene effect and the negative impacts for paper money in health.
The plastic money can also be recycled. The central bank says it has purchased the specialized printing machine and will be installed soon at the new administrative capital. Experts calmed any fears of currency destabilization once the new notes are introduced in the market.
The change of form of plastic money in Egypt, no or little impact on the value of Egyptian pound or value of the currency.
Although the new Egyptian pound will be made of plastic, not paper, but the central bank says Egyptians will not feel much difference because the design of the currency will remain as it is. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, the carrier that's home to Africa's biggest fleet, Ethiopian Airlines, is expected to post a full-year profit of over $200 million. At the moment, the carrier flies to about 120 destinations worldwide, and it has been aggressively buying up stakes in African airlines, which it now plans to relaunch at some point. CGTN's Girum Chala filed this report.
Achieving its 120th destination in 5 continents across the world by resuming its flights to Russia this month, 2018 was yet another successful year for Ethiopian Airlines. It's expected to profit more than $200 million this year.
Ethiopia's international image has improved tremendously. Ethiopia's international PR has improved tremendously, especially since the last 6 months with the current reform and changes undertaken by His Excellency Prime Minister Dr. Abiy and his cabinet. So this has attracted the attention of the world. So quite significant number of people from all over the world are interested to visit Ethiopia, to invest in Ethiopia, and to do business with Ethiopia. So in this newly arising economic opportunity, we are serving as a bridge.
72 years in the business and still flying higher and higher. Under government ownership, Ethiopian Airlines is not only the oldest African airliner, but also the most successful one too. It has proved enterprise can be profitable while under government ownership.
We see the last 10 years, out of the 72 years history of the airline, if you divide it into 2, the first 60 years or the first 62 years and then the last decade, it shows you that the airline has achieved remarkable growth in terms of its performance, in terms of its size now. In Vision 2025, we've made the airline now the largest airline in Africa, the most profitable, and the fastest growing airline in Africa, if not in the world.
The continuous profit of the airliner is set to support the overall Ethiopian economic growth. The flour sector, for instance, has taken advantage of ET's performance.
The flour sector is generating more than $200 million foreign exchange. So our profitability, our sound balance sheet is enabling us to support the sector. Had it been purely on economics, on a business relationship point of view, we would have increased the price and the flour exporters wouldn't have been able to afford it.
Ethiopian Airlines Group now co-owns several airliners across Africa, such as Askai in Togo and Air Malawi. And ET is also helping relaunch Air Chad, Guinea and Zambia. Ethiopia's flag carrier now owns more than 110 state-of-the-art planes. The young fleet size has names like Boeing, Airbus and Bombardier aircrafts. With 22 domestic destinations, ET saves foreign currency from leaving the country by providing service through local currency. That money is estimated to be equivalent to around $300 million every year. Group Data CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Time for a short break on the programme. There's plenty more coming up, including this. We're waiting on the US Federal Reserve to announce its decision on interest rates. And the EU agrees to a goal of cutting carbon emissions from cars by 37% in the next decade.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
All right, and let's make a run through the stories making you headlines at this hour, starting in South Africa. An arrest warrant has been issued for Zimbabwe's former First Lady Grace Mugabe. This stems from an alleged assault in an upmarket district of Johannesburg last year. The South African government had granted Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity, but that immunity was overturned by a court this year after the alleged victim, the model Gabriela Engels, challenged that decision. Elsewhere in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the governor of the capital, Kinshasa, has ordered a stop to campaigning in the city ahead of Sunday's presidential vote. Security has been cited as the main reason for this. This comes in the wake of crackdowns by security forces on opposition supporters last week that killed at least 7 people and a fire that destroyed thousands of voting machines. In the Indian Ocean island nation of Madagascar, voters have been casting their ballots to select a new president in a runoff election that pits 2 former heads of state against each other. In the first round of voting in November, Andry Rajoelina got 39% of votes cast. Mark Ravalomanana got just 35%. And finally, a UN-supported mobile court has now started hearing cases in South Sudan's northern town of Bentiu. The courts bring back legal justice to the town for the first time in more than 4 years. The last official session was held in December 2013 before civilians and court officials fled the civil war that left almost 400,000 people dead. That's the run through your headlines. All right, then, rate-setting season continues. The U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and his colleagues have just concluded a statement following a 2-day policy meeting. The market had anticipated the move and posted gains. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 170 points in early trade. All right, so let's get to the latest on the rate-setting decision coming through from the United States. Daniel Regis joins me now live from Washington, D.C. with more here. So, Daniel, walk us through the key points from the Fed's decision today. What are they looking for? What's the glide path going into 2019?
Well, the market is generally expecting a quarter-point rate hike to a range of 2.25 to 2.5% for their federal funds rate, the rate at which banks lend to each other overnight, and that gets trickled through to the overall economy. But given that Donald Trump is putting pressure on Jerome Powell to not raise rates as the market expects, it's being given heightened concern about whether Jerome Powell could be subject to political pressure. But, you know, I think at this point, and I'm sticking my neck out, I think it would be a little foolish not to go ahead with something that the market already expects. And given the strong economic data here in the United States, there's no real reason at this point to not hold the path. But there's a big question mark over 2019. Many in the Fed were projecting 3 rate hikes or even 4 for 2019. The question is, at this press conference that he's about to give and with the statement, will they project a much lower potential path going forward? I think that's going to be what moves the markets.
Indeed, but isn't the Fed, at least in a very general sense here, isn't the Fed sort of boxed into a corner? Because on one hand, you've got the president constantly hectoring them on Twitter. So if they do pause their rate hike schedule, even if they change the 2019 forecast, can the Fed plausibly avoid this perception that central bank policy is no longer truly independent?
Well, I want to cite Star Wars, the movie Star Wars, in which Obi-Wan Kenobi urges Luke Skywalker, the young training fighter, to use his feelings. Donald Trump has bizarrely told Jerome Powell to do a similar thing. He says on Twitter, "Feel the market, don't just go by meaningless numbers." So I'm calling this Obi-Wan Conomics. I don't think that Jerome Powell is going to go down the path of becoming an Obi-Wan Conomics expert, because of the fact that the gold standard of decision making will still be the data, the hard data that the US is putting out. And at the moment, the data is still strong, despite all the market uncertainty that we see around us. But the good thing of the flexibility of the data is that when it changes, you can react to that and justify your decisions. I think if he were to bow too much to political pressure at this point, it would undermine his case to be the leader of the central bank. And therefore, it's much more important for him to say, if he does make a different decision, to justify it on the basis of economics, not on feelings.
Indeed, another Obi-Wan Kenobi line does come to mind. Use the Force, Luke, or in this case, use the Force, Jerome. One last question for you. So putting aside the president and his politics aside from the time being, fund managers, investors like Druckenmiller, they've been calling for the Fed to pause its rate hike cycle. But what is the combination of data and the forecast moving into 2019 that informs that position?
Well, there is some justification for believing that 2019 could be more volatile, more uncertain. Potentially, there could be a downturn. But equally, if they are able to move beyond the uncertainty that we currently see, specifically on the global economy and Donald Trump's relationship with China and the European Union, if they are able to make a deal on that, that removes a lot of the uncertainty from the markets that we're currently seeing. And therefore, if Jerome Powell and his colleagues were to pause too sort of avidly in their rate hike cycle, and we did start to see inflation go up, then they would be exposed and they'd have to ramp up rates at a higher pace. So in the end, it's still about balance. In the end, it's still about doing things that the data suggests are the right thing to do. But one last point I would make, core inflation, which is the gold standard for the Fed in deciding rates, has been a little lower than the 2% target rate. So certainly he does have some room to be a little bit more dovish, to give a little bit more going into 2019. And that may well be a projection of slightly less rate hikes going into 2019, as the market has already forecast in its bond buying activities.
Indeed. Let's see if Jerome Powell has the proverbial Millennium Falcon to do the Kessel Run, at least the monetary version of it, in 12 parsecs. We'll leave it there for the time being. Daniel Wenges in Washington, D.C. Now, the EU has agreed to a goal of cutting carbon emissions from cars by at least 37.5% in the next 10 years. That's expected to finally settle differences between vehicle manufacturers on one hand and lawmakers on the other. Now, the bloc has been divided for months now over just how strict it should be on CO2 emissions from vehicles as part of its push to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. According to Austria's sustainability minister, emissions from vans would be cut by about 31% by 2030, but that has triggered criticism from some who say these goals are too ambitious and just not realistic. A separate negotiation has to be held tomorrow, Thursday, to discuss the extent to which truck emissions should be cut.
We were able to present a result after intensive negotiations. It was a 37.5% reduction target for cars and a 31% for vans.
The 37.5% CO2 reduction target as proposed now by the environment ministers and the European Parliament is going to be, in our opinion, too ambitious and not realistic based on the facts we know today. On top, it will have major implications on jobs, because the higher targets mean we have to move much faster towards electrification in the near future, which will inevitably mean we have to reorganize our production units, our plants, which will have an impact on jobs, because you need, in principle, less people to produce electric vehicles than fuel combustion cars.
We expect a big row on Thursday, and principally this will be about whether or not the targets for 2030 are binding. The manufacturers actually have to meet them, and if they are, what level those targets will be set at. We're hoping for at least a 30% reduction overall. We also expect there to be a considerable discussion about how to encourage the shift to zero emission trucks.
On to Brexit now. The UK's government says it will implement plans for a no-deal exit from the EU, and it's urging businesses and citizens alike to prepare for the risk of crashing out of the EU without a deal. Prime Minister Theresa May is yet to win support in a deeply divided parliament for the deal that she's spent years negotiating with Brussels that essentially maintains relatively close ties with the EU. A delayed vote on the deal is expected to take place in the middle of January. CGTN's Timothy Ulrich has more.
With just 100 days left to go before the deadline to leave the EU arrives, the British government is scrambling to prepare for any possible outcome. UK Brexit Secretary Stephen Barclay has come out defending a contingency plan in the event a no-deal divorce happens, calling it the responsible thing to do, but he maintains that passing the deal is the better option.
The government's priority remains to secure a deal, but we need to recognise with 14 weeks to go that a responsible government is preparing for the eventuality that we leave without a deal.
British government officials, including Barclay, say informing businesses and citizens of the impact of a no-deal Brexit is of utmost importance. However, that's just a small part of this allocation of £2 billion, or about $2.5 billion US. One possible project is to set aside space on ferries to ensure a regular flow of medical supplies. But the part of the plan raising the most eyebrows is Downing Street, putting 3,500 troops on standby. Defense Secretary Gavin Williamson has come out in support of this proposal.
We've as yet not had any formal requests from any government department, but what we are doing is putting contingency plans in place, and what we will do is have 3,500 service personnel held at readiness, including regulars and reserves, in order to support any government department on any contingencies they may need.
Some are saying a contingency plan is a smart move as divisions continue to run deep in Parliament. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister announced the vote on the Brexit deal would be delayed until January 14th, but this was only met with more criticisms, including from Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn, who accused May of trying to run the clock out. No matter the case, the government is looking to put all options on the table. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
In the face of a shortage of labour, Germany's cabinet has agreed on a new immigration law. Regulations will make it a lot easier for skilled workers outside the EU to come and work in Europe's largest economy. But it's not expected to do much for the over 1 million people who've already come to Germany in the last 2 years as asylum seekers. CGTN's Iris Spitzer has more from Berlin.
Originally from Afghanistan, Matula is now training to work in this Berlin restaurant. Like many other asylum seekers, the 27-year-old arrived in Germany in 2015. This internship is his first job opportunity in the country.
I was really interested in this job, and that's why I chose it.
Now I'm working and happy with my choice to train in the hospitality industry.
His initial asylum application was rejected, but he's allowed to stay while he appeals the decision. He's not alone. Over half of asylum claims in Germany are unsuccessful, leaving hundreds of thousands of people in similar situations. Many live in fear of being suddenly told they need to leave the country. Germany's cabinet has just agreed on a major overhaul of its immigration law. With more than 1 million unfilled jobs in the country, the law is intended to make it easier for employers to bring in skilled workers from outside the European Union. The proposed new law does provide opportunities for failed asylum seekers to stay and work under certain conditions. But many experts say the requirements to transition to legal immigration are so hard to meet that few people will be able to take advantage of them. That uncertainty makes it difficult for both employers and workers.
The fact is that there are many asylum seekers in Germany, and whether they're granted asylum or not, many of them bring certain skills with them or would offer the possibility of contributing to the economy.
Refugees are a divisive political issue in Germany. In May, the finance ministry said the country expected to spend more than $80 billion on migration-related issues over the next 4 years, much of that on social benefits. Matula says he's ready to continue training to become a skilled worker and to start paying into the system. But while the new law may help to bring more people to the country, it might not do much for those who are already here. Ira Spitzer, CGTN, Berlin.
Let's get back into the business of transport for a while, if we may. Elon Musk's underground transport venture, the Boring Company, I know, big pun there, it's unveiled its first tunnel. Musk has advertised his 3.2-kilometer tunnel as a first step towards developing high-speed underground network transportation to ease traffic congestion. Now, the tunnel runs under the municipality of Hawthorne. That's also the headquarters for the Boring Company and the rocket firm that he also set up, SpaceX. In a tweet earlier this month, Musk revealed it would include autonomous vehicles and ground-to-tunnel elevators for cars. In June, the Boring Company was selected to build a 17-mile underground transit system that links the city's downtown area to O'Hare International Airport. On to Mexico. Alternative medicine is a growing industry in that country. Ancient remedies apparently can provide natural ways of treating a whole bunch of illnesses while allowing Mexicans to connect to their heritage. CGTN's Alistair Baverstock reports on the growing popularity of bee therapy.
Apitherapy. It's the treatment of illness through products that come from honeybees, particularly their venom. And in Mexico, it's very popular. Estimates suggest some 60% of Mexicans are proponents of indigenous medicine, and where there's honey production, there are bee sting clinics. Leticia Solis is one such practitioner, trained and certified by the Mexican Apitherapy Association.
Manejamos los productos naturales de la abejita.
At least one apitherapist in every state, and the advantage we have is that it's an all-round treatment which can be used to help a wide variety of problems.
Leticia's patients suffer from various ailments, but all claim the treatment has helped.
I suffered from regular epileptic fits, but I've been coming here for 3 years and haven't experienced an episode in 2.5 years and feel perfectly well.
I have arthritis that made movement painful. It even hurt to turn my head from side to side. But I've been coming here for 2 years, and now I don't depend on medicine.
According to scientific research, bee venom has both anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties, but that may not be the extent of these insects' benefits. The honey they produce is effective at healing burns, while propolis, the sealant the bees produce to build their hives, shows promise fighting both the HIV virus and leukemia.
Bee sting properties have intrigued rheumatologist Conrado Garcia, who, having been sceptical about the treatment, now says further investigation is required.
From a scientific point of view, multiple substances have been found in bee venom which are specifically helpful in the control and regulation of inflammation. This could be an explanation for why patients with these sorts of illnesses have seen clinical improvements.
Anyone severely allergic to bee stings should steer clear of apitherapy, as a reaction could prove life-threatening. But most here in Mexico see the treatment as a way to reconnect with their ancestral heritage, as they seek health and well-being through this unconventional approach. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Zitácuaro, Mexico.
Well, you certainly learn something new every day. Quick run through commodity prices, if you will. So dry and hot winds and below average rainfall. Combine those two and that could make a mess of the harvest in the world's biggest cocoa producer. Now, these conditions can make bean pods much smaller and they drain moisture out of the soil as well, causing lower than expected yields. And those are the concerns that are being partly reflected in the price, with March futures hitting a 6-week high today, even at about $22.86 a ton. That was at about 12:12 GMT in New York. Cocoa contracts are still up 16% so far in 2018. Here's what's coming up next. Nigeria's Honeywell Group graduates its first cohort of startups.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. The Nigerian conglomerate, the Honeywell Group, has graduated its first cohort from its venture capital platform called Etana. Now, the conglomerate set up Etana earlier this year to fund and support startups to develop and build their businesses. Only 4 startups out of the 208 from 6 African countries that applied were selected for a 4-month accelerator program. 2 of those ended up with $25,000 in funding for each of them. CGTN's Deji Badmos has that report on Grassroots.
For 4 whole months, this was more or less like a workplace for the founders of the 4 startups that made it to the accelerator program. It's the Etana Enterprise Factory, where the founders of the startups spend most of their time being assisted to fine-tune their ideas. 2 of them are setting to get $25,000 in funding from Etana for an 8% equity share of their startups.
So the way this was positioned for us is that 2 of the startups are going to receive $25,000. In fact, a portion of the money has already been paid to them. 2 of the other startups were selected into the program with the idea that all through the program we evaluate them and then make a final decision as to if they were going to get money or not.
The 2 startups that are receiving the $25,000 each in funding are called Accountier, an accounting tech platform for small businesses.
Basically, Accountier is a smart cloud accounting platform for SMEs. We help SMEs to manage their financials and their accounting effectively. So everything that has to do with their financial process, from invoice management, expense, inventory, and also bank reconciliation, our platform is the best platform to do that.
PowerCube is looking to bring clean energy to Africans, for now Nigerians, both homes and businesses. We're trying to help them save their current costs by up to 50% month on month.
For the duration of their stay at the Etana Enterprise Factory, the young entrepreneurs are exposed to Honeywell's extensive network of experts training, workshops and mentorship sessions with experienced entrepreneurs.
We believe that these businesses are positioned well for the future. We believe that through Etana, not just as businesses, as we now go into our next program and also invest directly with other businesses, we'll be in a position where we would have within the next 5 years have invested in up to 50 businesses across not just Nigeria but across Africa.
Before exiting the accelerator program, the startups were given the opportunity to pitch their ideas and products before a select group of potential investors.
We spent the past 4 months preparing these guys, helping them craft a market strategy, helping them, take a deeper look into how best to analyze their different markets and how best to basically come up with a strategy for them to expand in the different markets. So the demo day is basically the final product for these guys to come up on stage and basically show to the world what they've been doing the past 4 months.
We've opened doors for them so that they're able to sell their products into people we know and into companies that are not just associated with us, companies across the Nigerian economy.
Access to finance is a major challenge for most startups in Nigeria, but Honeywell Group's Etana is helping to address the problem. It's up to the startups that have benefited from this innovative program to go out there, compete and scale. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
The Bureau of Engraving and Printing in the United States has introduced the Lucky Money collection ahead of the next Chinese Lunar New Year. The pig dollar became available to the market on Tuesday.
The Year of the Pig dollar is the latest entry in the Bureau of Engraving and Printing Lucky Money collection. The product is designed with decorative Chinese symbolism, coming packaged in a symbolic red folder adorned in full color. It features an uncirculated $1 Federal Reserve note. It has a serial number beginning with 4 number 8s, a number considered lucky in China. The Year of the Pig occupies the latest position in the Chinese zodiac 12-year cycle. It is noted for good luck, abundance, and wealth.
For us, the lucky money every year is to recognize the contributions of the Chinese to the American culture, and we understand that it is a tradition to give new money in the new year, and we wanted to enable them to do that, and it's enabled us to learn a little bit about their culture as well.
The Bureau of Engraving and Printing is the nation's sole producer of U.S. paper currency. It started designing and producing lucky money for the Chinese Lunar New Year in 2000. Ding Xie, CGTN.
All right then, so a quick run through the currencies here for you. As far as the Naira is concerned, we spoke about exchange rates, different exchange rates we're using to essentially work the dollar number for the budgets coming out of Nigeria. This is the one we're using essentially that's available to investors and traders like you and I. On the budget front, or rather the macro data front in East Africa, some interesting developments there. A quarter suspended, a 1.5% mandatory levy that was supposed to take effect in another 2 weeks or so. By some estimates, that levy would have raised about $550 million a year for a very ambitious, low-cost housing program in East Africa. Where do we go from here? We'll find out and update you. Those are your currencies, and this has been this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screen right now. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington.